Hello, just an update here. So this is one of my hydroponic units. This unit, although it has an Apple sticker on it right now, it was manufactured by a company called Ewing. They're a Chinese manufacturer of appliances, and they generally make things like fans and refrigerators, so these units are not too fancy. The units are called Greenfarm. They basically just have a light timer. They have a fan and they have a bubbler that comes on for something like 5 minutes once an hour. They do have a germination mode which will not operate the lights, and they have a flower mode which will not operate the bubbler in case you want to put soiled potted plants in there. So basically they work really well, although they're not very sophisticated. Um, One of the good things about them is that they're clear all the way through. Now you'll notice on mine I have some reflective backing because I'm using it indoors in the basement where there's no lights. But if you use it in a room that does have natural light on a windowsill, for example, then you can leave the back open, and since it's clear, light will come through. They don't have any sort of smart functionality or internet connectivity, but I have added this thermometer unit in the back. It records the temperature and the humidity, and it can be accessed from your smartphone. This particular thermometer unit is from SmartBot, and the good thing about this is it can be used with various internet services, so that, for example, you can use if this then that, and you could use it to control, for example, an additional fan to keep the humidity in check, things like that, if you wanted to. Right now I'm not doing that. This is the first thermometer from this manufacturer. I'm just testing it at the moment. So one of the nice things about this unit is that it opens forward like this, which means you don't need to have space above the unit to be able to open it. And this drawer slides in so that it doesn't stick out too much if you want to leave it open. Inside you can see there's these various caps that I have in place. These caps basically open. There's a small hole. This is designed to be used with grow sponges. Unfortunately, it's not designed to be used with pots, although I did find some mini pots that I can use. So some of these are in pots, some of them are just in sponges. The disadvantage of not using the pots is that if the plants become big and heavy, they can sink down. Sometimes if you lift up the tray, then they can also sink down. These plants are pretty small, so they're probably okay. One nice thing is this tray lifts up nice and cleanly. You can monitor the water, clean it out if you want when algae builds up, things like that. Generally, there's not too much algae buildup, provided you put the caps in place. You can see some of these sponges where seeds have not grown, they started white, they turn like dark green because of algae. So typically, if the seeds don't sprout after a while, then I'll take out the sponge and replace it with the cap. One interesting thing is that because it is winter right now, temperatures in this room are not very warm. So when I keep it closed and the light heats it up during the day, it'll get to like 21, 22 degrees, but at nighttime it drops down to like 10 to 15. So you can see that these basil plants are not growing very quickly. They've been in here for a month and a half now. If this were summertime, they'd be huge. I do have one here that's a little bit bigger, but it still will take some time. So I actually have 3 of these units stacked right here. This one's come a little farther along. One thing I've noticed that does grow much better in the winter is this cresson. I think it's called watercress in English, and I also have this other leaf plant, which this is actually the smaller one. There was one that got much too large for this unit, and I took it out already. So just to give you an idea. Now, and there's a 3rd unit on the bottom here with more watercress and basil. So these units, like I said, they're not bad. They work pretty well, and you can pick them up quite cheaply used. They're like $200 new, which I think is a little expensive for something that's just a glorified LED light timer. But one thing that I really like about them is that they're very good for hacking, right? This tray holds a reasonable amount of water and it comes out easily. The electronics are contained to certain areas, so you can drill holes in it if you need to. One thing that is not great about these units is they have these water I want to call sensor, but I guess you'd say indicator. Um, these things, as the water level increases, they will go up. When you see this line, that means it's full. As the water decreases, they're supposed to go down, right? They're just floaters. The problem is when they get crusty from plant food buildup or from roots from the plants, then they will not go down properly. So because of that, I'm not usually planting on the corner. If I do plant in the corner and the plant grows, then I'll move it. So because of that, and because in the summer the water levels can drop very quickly when you have a bunch of large plants, I've had numerous occasions where the plants have died. So I don't have time to check these every single day. One of the reasons for using hydroponics is that it's low maintenance, but just because of the way the water levels can drop, that causes an issue. So I've sort of hacked these units to get around that problem. You can see here there's a water outlet, and if you look up here, there's a small black tube where water comes in. So I have a pump, and the pump will basically fill water at the top. When the water is overfilled, it will drain down to the next unit. You can see there's a little inlet in the back there, this black area. When this tray starts to overfill, the water will drain down to the next unit. Again, there's an inlet in the back. It's hard to see. One thing I do have to be careful of is to make sure that the water from the inlet does not bounce off a plant leaf and get everywhere. That's happened once or twice. So I could potentially make the inlet go directly into the tank instead of pouring on top, however. So at the bottom, there's a final outlet, and when that water level is exceeded, it goes down to a tank here. So I have this relatively large tank. It was originally an aquarium tank. Basically, I've just covered the tank with black foam so that algae doesn't build up in there. And inside there is a pump. So the pump will pump water up to the top unit. Now, originally when I tried this, the problem was that getting a pump strong enough to pump water to the top unit also meant that its volume was very high and the unit would overflow. So in order to make the pumping speed slower, I've created sort of a tank at the top, a reservoir. So this tank fills up with water about halfway, and then the water will flow through this black tube into the top unit slowly. So the intent here is not to create an ebb and flow type systems. These are sort of what I would call shallow water culture systems, but it is good to have the nutrient circulated sometimes, and the main intention is just to keep all these units full at all times. So I only have to monitor one tank, which is the big tank at the bottom, and I can fill that up full enough that the water will last at least 2 months. So this works fairly well. The other sort of disadvantage of these units is that the aeration pump only comes on once an hour for 5 minutes or so, which is less than ideal. So it makes sense for people who want to have it in their living room and have it be quiet, but for my use, I want to grow the plants more optimally, so therefore I have connected, you can see this small black hose here, and there's another one down here. These are connected to a splitter here, which goes to a relatively large air pump. So I can easily pump air to all 3 of these units continuously, and that makes things work somewhat better. In fact, you can see that the areas on the right side where the aeration is coming in tend to grow faster. So I will be adding 2 air stones to each unit, one on the right and one on the left. So basically the hacks I've done to these units have worked well, and I'll continue to experiment on them. Bottom outlet here needs to be converted to a smaller one so that I can close this, but otherwise I'm mostly done with what I want to do with these. I have 3 different brands of thermometers I've been testing here. It's hard to even see the one on the second level, but I like the one on the top the best, so I'll probably convert them all to that type. Again, I've covered the back with reflective materials only because this is in a room that does not have light. This company also sells the seeds. I typically buy the seeds from this company even for my other units because They typically germinate well, and they do pick varieties that don't grow too large. So the next unit I have here it's called the yasai monogatari, which is like the story of the vegetable. This unit looks much fancier and probably more futuristic, but it actually sucks in a lot of ways. So one thing is that it's hard to tell by looking at it, but it is actually much smaller. The amount of space inside is smaller, the amount of space in the tray is smaller. The tray is much more prone to spilling because it's much shallower, and you have to pull it completely out to get the top off, if that makes any sense. The top, instead of being one tray, is actually 3 different strips, and all of those strips are basically set up so that they can't be moved while this thing is closed. So you have to pull out the drawer entirely to be able to touch them at all. The setup is similar to the other unit in that there are small holes. It's designed to take grow sponges. The holes on this one are smaller, so I can't find any net pots small enough to fit in them. And again, you can't lift these up unless you open the drawer, so you have to take this out pretty much entirely. So once you take it out this far, you can sort of kind of lift this up. It's not really a super convenient design. This thing also has lights with a timer, and it also has a fan built in, and it also has an air bubbler built in. This device is a so-called smart device, which means it does connect to your smartphone via Bluetooth, and it does have Wi-Fi. So unfortunately, I think the capabilities of this smart device are sort of wasted. So what do I mean by that? Well, it has a camera, which is sort of gimmicky in my view. It takes a picture every 4 hours, and you can view those in the smartphone app. There's no website for this, so you have to use the smartphone app. So as soon as your Android or iOS version is too old, you won't be able to use it anymore. It also needs to connect to your smartphone via Bluetooth during setup, and it's very, very finicky. So in fact, if the power goes out, I need to reset it all again. It takes me like 15 minutes. So for that reason, I have it connected to a UPS right now. The back is not transparent on this. As you can see, it's white, which means putting it near a windowsill will not help. You're not going to get any more light. The way that it opens up, the top comes up, so you need a fair amount of clearance. You definitely cannot stack these units. You can view the temperature and humidity in this, so you don't need to buy a separate thermometer, but I mean, you can view them on your smartphone app, but that's about it. It doesn't actually take any action with regard to those, so far as I know. So yeah, it's kind of spiffy that it has the camera and everything, but it's not terribly useful. So I would much rather that they sold the thermometer, humidifier, or humidity meter, and the camera as a little kit that you could add to any unit, rather than selling this sort of chintzy unit as they do. Again, none of these units have any heating or cooling features other than the fact that there's a fan. None of them have a humidifier or dehumidifier built in. None of them will automatically add plant food, nothing like that. In fact, none of them will remind you to add plant food. So, sort of primitive on some level, despite being a quote-unquote smart device. So, the last device to show you is the foop here. This is by far the most advanced device. I don't have anything planted in it at the moment, but this device has larger holes. This device can be stacked. It needs a kit, I think, but it has a nice curvy opening mechanism. It has a tray similar to the other units. You can see it has 2 bubblers in there. This one holds a huge amount of water. The whole bottom part is basically a water shelf. There's different versions of this unit. The professional version has a camera, and it has sensors to monitor the pH and the food concentration, everything else, the nutrient concentration. This is the normal version, so it doesn't have all of that, but it does measure CO2 levels and a number of other things. For example, it measures the light level, and if it's in a brighter environment, it'll use less power for the LEDs. It measures the humidity and CO2 and decides the fan speed based on that. So it is pretty fancy in some sense, but you have absolutely no control over anything. For example, you can't control how long the light runs per day. You just tell it what type of vegetable you're growing. So I do wish there was more that you could do to manually set it up. Again, there's no website to access this stuff. You have to use the smartphone app. So it is a bit limiting in my opinion. So next one here is this device from Iena. Basically, this device is intended to put in a bright area of the house, so it doesn't come with any sort of light. It's also very large. This can be used to grow tomatoes or whatever you prefer. Right now you see this kind of sickly looking tomato plant in there. That is because this plant I grew outdoors actually with this unit in the summer, and so far as I knew, it died when the winter came. So when I went out to clean up the unit, I found that it was still alive, and I decided to keep it on life support for a while and see if it'll bounce back or not. If it doesn't, no big loss. Because it doesn't come with a light, I am using a separate light here, but it seems to be enough. Okay, so all of these units except for the last one are basically indoor units that are designed to be put on a countertop or something like that. Again, for hackability purposes, I actually prefer the Greenfarm units, which are sort of the most primitive, but they're also the ones that you can customize the most. Now, because I've been at this for a while and I wanted to get something a little more, let's say, fancy, something a little more expandable, something that could be used to grow larger fruits and vegetables, and also something that let's say is a little more automated in a smart way, in a useful way. So because of that, I have purchased something called the AeroGarden Farm. Now, this was not easy to get my hands on because it's not sold in Japan. It is quite a bit larger than the other units, as you can see. Also, because of shipping restrictions, I can't get the seed pods for it directly from the US, so I'm working on that at the moment. In the meantime, I have some net pots in there. Those may actually work just as well. So this thing does have a touch panel display. It also lets you use these controls basically on your smartphone. The lights here are adjustable, so they can move up and down, which is very convenient. So you can literally adjust them on the unit itself. So I can just press a button to lower these. I think this is pretty neat because when the vegetables are small, you can have the light get close to them. As they get larger, you can raise them up. So as you can see, I have, because this is sort of an open air unit, it's not closed, and you really want a closed unit, I think, for a lot of reasons. So because of that, I have sort of wrapped it with some light curtains at the moment. It's interesting, the left and right sides are sort of separate, so you can have separate controls for the lights and everything else. These units are a little bit different in how they work from all the other ones I have, in the sense that they're not bubbler type units. Instead, they have a pump that circulates water up to the top, puts it around the grow pods, and then it drips down. So I have seen a lot of people adding air pumps to these as well, but by default that's not the way they work. The good thing about this unit is you can control when the pump runs for how long, you can control when the light runs for how long, and it will automatically remind you to add plant food. Now granted, that's not based on any sensor, it's just based on time, but it does have a lot of options. So for example, you go into plant food and it says right now it's 14 days, you can change it if need be. It also does have reasonable defaults for all of the different things you might grow. So for example, if you go to quick plant, and then it'll ask you what you're planting and so forth. So here's, you can change the clock, And then it'll ask you, well, what are you growing in? So if you say, oh, I'm growing tomatoes, then it'll come back and say, well, these are the default settings you should have for tomatoes. So I think this device has a lot of potential, but I have yet to experiment with it. So to be honest, I have two devices here that I sort of haven't experimented with much, and there's something I'll be working on from now on. By the way, the display on this foop unit, it basically is not configurable. It just randomly comes up with stuff to display. So there are certain symbols that mean something, and the rest are just sort of random screensaver type stuff. It is an interesting design, I'll give it that. Okay, so then the last unit is next to the tank down here. This is also a Greenfarm unit. This is a smaller unit. Basically, the way it works is the same. It has water at the bottom. This one doesn't come with a bubbler, but you can see there's a little cutout in the back to add one. So if you just get an aquarium pump and a stone, you can add your own. It also has control to set the timing for the lights, and you can see how many days these items have been planted. It's pretty simple. Other than that, it has lights and a fan. Usually it works really well, but for whatever reason, this time I planted, I think, just basil in there, and none of them have grown. So I think it's because it's too cold and that unit doesn't heat up as much as the other units do. One good thing about that unit, though, is that the way that it opens is that the top lifts off. So you can actually prop the top up higher as the plants grow, and it can actually handle taller plants than any of the other units. Now back to these big Greenfarm units, I do have one more of these that I've sort of partially disassembled. And basically what I've done is I've taken out the screws between this white and clear sections, and that also will allow me to raise the roof on that. So that one I have upstairs right now, and it's full of mint and some other plants that kind of can grow very large. So I hope you enjoyed. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Again, some of these units I'm sure are available only for sale in Japan. So I've seen some questions on forums and such with people saying, oh, I wish I had like a Miracle-Gro unit. Do they sell anything like that in Japan? Well, yes and no. They sell these units. These ones that are self-contained appliance type units tend to be more popular. I do like them because they can be stacked, and also they can be customized a lot more. So electricity is expensive in Japan, but I think that the economics do work out pretty well, especially because you can buy the grow sponges and the seeds from other manufacturers if you like. So for example, they say that one of these units costs $3 a month to operate. So I have 3 of these units. Theoretically, that means it costs me $9 a month to operate. Me adding the pump, it only runs for a minute once every 2 hours, so that doesn't cost any significant amount of electricity. I really doubt that the air bubbler does either. It's mostly going to be the lights and the fan that cost money. So if you were to say this costs 300 yen times 3, well, let's just round it up and say it costs $10 a month to operate. So you could grow a normal weather in the spring or summer. You could grow these entirely full of basil every month. I would say that, you know, the cost of basil at the supermarket is like 100 yen, 200 yen for a couple leaves. You know, just having one of these grow every month is easily worth $10 a month if you actually like basil. The watercress here, I'm not sure what the price is at the store, but it does grow rather prolifically in the winter. Usually they show people growing lettuce in these. I don't tend to grow lettuce just because lettuce is so cheap at the store. You can buy a huge head of lettuce for 100 or 200 yen. And rather than growing a bunch of small lettuces in here, I think it makes more sense just to buy lettuce. I mean, of course, there is something to be said for growing it yourself. The entertaining thing is that when I do buy lettuce at the store, it almost always comes with a little sponge at the bottom, so I know that they grew it the same way. Definitely it's grown hydroponically. Anyway, if you have any questions, comments, please get back to me, and I will do my best to give you an answer.